Warfare often brings out the darkest parts of humanity, but when the bullets stop flying and peace is finally reached, we have a duty to hold the criminals accountable for their actions. However, in the years since the end of the most destructive war in human history, the Japanese government still hasn't taken full responsibility for wartime atrocities. In this video, we dive into the horrific deeds of the Imperial Japanese Empire. But first, a warning. This is gonna be a grim one. While the Allies advanced toward Japan in the final days of the Second World War, the Japanese military police were busy burning documents. Not battle plans, nor POW records, no. They were burning records concerning so-called comfort women. This is what they wanted to hide. From 1932 to 1945, between 100,000 and 200,000 women and girls were trafficked across the Japanese Empire to inappropriately named comfort stations. There, they were continually beaten and raped, sometimes as often as 40 times per day, by Japanese soldiers and officers. These enslaved women were usually forced to work in the rape stations for just a few months, their bodies too damaged to be of much, in quotation marks, use to the Japanese after that. In the early stages of Japan's campaign to conquer the Asia Pacific, prostitutes from Japan voluntarily followed the army to staff brothels set up for the officers. Army higher-ups wanted more, but the supply of willing volunteers from Japan quickly evaporated. Their first fix was to start the propaganda machine. Clerical, manufacturing, and nursing jobs were advertised with generous salaries, and they attracted many young female workers. It was a scam, and these women quickly found themselves forced into sexual slavery. When word of the scam got out, the Japanese started paying local gangs for a steady supply of women instead. These unlucky ones were kidnapped off the street on their way home from work or from outside their schools. Women and girls as young as 11 from China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaya, Thailand, Burma, New Guinea, Hong Kong, Macau, French Indochina, the Netherlands, and Australia were preyed upon, but the majority were Korean. They were kidnapped by gangsters or soldiers and then broken in by constant rape. The physical trauma they experienced often led to infections, but life-saving medicine was kept for use on soldiers only. The damage inflicted on these women and girls left many infertile. The horror of military-run sexual slavery is too much for many in Japan, to the point where some political factions outright deny it. Some politicians, such as Toru Hashimoto, the former mayor of Osaka, try to justify the atrocity. In his own words, "When soldiers are running around at the risk of losing their lives, if you want them to have a rest in such a situation, a comfort woman system is necessary. Anyone can understand that. We don't understand it." Only the most deranged minds could come up with a fate worse than what we've just described, and the Japanese managed to do just that. They were the doctors from hell who officially worked for the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. But unofficially, they were known as Unit 731. Based in northern China, Unit 731 experimented on POWs and civilians they'd kidnapped. The sadistic war criminals pretending to be doctors were interested in how the human body was affected by diseases when placed under different pressures. Healthy men, women, and children were purposely infected with debilitating diseases and then cut open while still alive for the Japanese to observe the disease's progress. When the madmen decided to study the disease syphilis, they forced an infected prisoner into sex with a healthy prisoner at gunpoint. But it really gets worse. Women were forcibly impregnated so that experiments could be carried out on them and their babies. No one survived. Unit 731 starved, burnt, and electrocuted prisoners, spun them to death in a centrifuge, poisoned them, replaced their blood with animal blood, injected them with seawater, tested experimental weapons on them, and conducted seemingly every other kind of cruel experiment that you can think of. A report on frostbite testing read, prisoners were taken outside in freezing weather and left with exposed arms, periodically drenched with water until frozen solid. After both arms were gone, the doctors moved on to the legs until only a head and torso remained. The victim was then used for plague and pathogens experiments. One of Unit 731's goals was to develop a pathogen they could use to wage biological warfare on Americans. The unit's chief, General Ishii, planned to airdrop plague-carrying fleas into the western United States to cause a pandemic. He wanted to make the Americans think twice before invading Japan, but weeks before he could put his plan into action, his country surrendered. Now, this is by far one of the worst parts of Unit 731's story. Not that they conducted the most psychopathically evil experiments imaginable, but that the Americans let them get away with it. In return for all of their ill-gotten research, General MacArthur secretly agreed to grant all the sadistic nutters at Unit 731 immunity from war crimes prosecution. They all escaped justice, and their research was later found to be amateurish and of no real medical use anyway. While those two examples were probably the most outwardly evil, soldiers of the Japanese Empire committed barbaric war crimes everywhere they went. There was the Nanjing Massacre, where the marauding Japanese army killed between 40,000 and 300,000 people. After killing and capturing nearly all military-aged men, the Japanese soldiers persecuted one of the worst incidences of mass rape in human history. In some cases, women were literally raped to death. The marauding soldiers' favorite targets were high schools. Many other massacres were carried out in China as part of the 3 alls policy: kill all, loot all, burn all. It was scorched earth on steroids and led to the deaths of roughly 2.7 million Chinese civilians, some from chemical weapons attacks. The policy was personally sanctioned by Emperor Hirohito, which quashes the ridiculous idea that he wasn't a top war criminal too. So if Emperor Hirohito knew about the scale of the atrocities his military was committing and willingly signed off on it, how many others are culpable too? This is a question that modern Japan is still wrestling with and is a common topic in their national debate. But despite greater public recognition for their past crimes, Japan still has a long way to go toward official acknowledgement. Take, for example, the historic Yasukuni Shrine, which functions as a national war memorial for Japanese servicemen who died between 1868 and 1954. There are over 2 million names commemorated on the shrine. 1,068 of those names are convicted war criminals. These were the sadists who set up rape stations, kidnapped girls as young as 11 for sexual enslavement, experimented on living people, and massacred hundreds of civilians. There are also 14 names of Class A war criminals. These are men convicted of masterminding the operations that left millions dead in their wake. There's no acknowledgement at the shrine of what these people did, and what's worse, the museum at the shrine deliberately whitewashes the narrative. It depicts Chinese civilians not running in fear for their lives, but welcoming the Japanese soldiers as liberators. The US is also cast as a warmonger that forced Imperial Japan into conflict by way of economic blockade. This sort of blatant propaganda is not how a nation comes to terms with its history, and the majority of the Japanese public knows this. Many are aware that what is sometimes called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity War has been heavily propagandized by the far right, but these ultra-nationalists still wield influence in modern Japan. That was the horrendous story of Imperial Japan's atrocities in the Second World War. But what do you think? Do you think the average Japanese soldier knew about the experiments of Unit 731? Did you know that the psychos at Unit 731 were let off the hook? Why do you think people still try and justify mass rape? Let us know all that and more in the comments section below. And finally, this was by no means an exhaustive list, and we already have other videos discussing some of the atrocities committed against Allied POWs by Imperial Japan. You can watch them here. Anyways guys, this is just one of those brutal topics that are really hard to get through, but they're so important to know and remember. So I hope you guys learned something new and take a moment to honor all those lost in some of these horrible, horrible atrocities.